On Point is a production of WBUR Boston and is distributed by APM, American Public Media.
This is KUOW-FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, and KQOW Bellingham. Week in Review is just a few minutes away to tell you what's on tap for today. Our host, Bill Radke.
Hey there. Looking forward to having you all stay tuned for Week in Review. This week, Seattle lost a police chief, gained an interim police chief. Now a search is on. What does SPD and what do the people of Seattle need? Also, how do local Republicans talk about having a convicted felon at the top of their ticket? Does a guaranteed income of free cash payments encourage people to quit, to work? Is it worth the investment? And speaking of worth, Seattle became a boom town. Was it worth it? That and more coming up on Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from North, Central, and South Seattle colleges, where nearly half those enrolled are the first in their families to attend college. Learn how a legacy gift can help to nurture their success and a more equitable and inclusive economy at seattlecolleges.edu/legacy. And from Third Place Books, Timothy Egan launches the paperback edition of his new book, A Fever in the Heartland, The Ku Klux Klan's Plot to Take Over America and the Woman Who Stopped Them. Thursday, June 6th at 7 p.m. Tickets available now at thirdplacebooks.com.
Hi, I'm Seattle Civic Poet Shinyi Pai, here to tell you about a new season of KUOW's 10,000 Things. It's a podcast exploring modern-day artifacts of Asian American life, ordinary objects that tell extraordinary and moving stories and teach us something new. Find 10,000 Things, available on your favorite podcast app.
Sunny skies today, high of 71.
Support for KUOW comes from Arch Bright, offering HR consulting to organizations on an ongoing or project basis, providing short-term help or long-term assistance as needed. Details at archbright.com. And from Village Theater, announcing their next season of live theater, including Lerner and Lowe's Camelot, Legally Blonde, the musical, and Jersey Boys, the story of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. Learn more at villagetheater.org.
Hi, I'm Chris Morgan, host of The Wild, a KUOW podcast about the wonder and resilience of nature and the people working to protect it. Our new season takes you through some of America's most iconic wild places, our national parks. From the tallest trees to the driest deserts, we'll explore the importance of biodiversity, its biggest threats, and the solutions at work to preserve these beloved landscapes. Listen to The Wild from KUOW, Chris Morgan Wildlife, and the NPR Network, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Seattle Civic Poet Shinyi Pai. 10,000 Things is a KUOW podcast about modern-day artifacts of Asian American life and the stories they tell. In each episode, we'll explore one ordinary object that tells an extraordinary story. From an old building...
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Former President Donald Trump is vowing to appeal his criminal conviction in New York. A day after a jury found the Republican guilty of 34 felony counts of falsifying business records, Trump said the judicial system's rigged. Margaret Talev, a senior contributor at Axios and director of the Syracuse University Institute for Democracy, Journalism, and Citizenship, says when you hear a former president incorrectly call the United States a fascist country, it further erodes people's trust in U.S. institutions.
If you look at the media people consume, if you read the New York Post, the headline today says injustice. If you read the New York Times or most mainstream publications, they say Trump found guilty. So there are real questions about whether Trump's messaging post-verdict is going to further degrade people's acceptance of the system that keeps us living peacefully and democratically.
Margaret Talev on NPR's Here and Now. One of the consequences of Trump's criminal conviction in New York is that he will lose certain civil rights in the state where he lives, Florida. But NPR's Greg Allen reports Trump will still be allowed to vote in the upcoming presidential election.
Florida law normally doesn't allow a convicted felon to vote until they've completed their sentence. But Florida defers to the laws in the states where a person is convicted. And New York State allows felons to vote as long as they're not incarcerated. Desmond Meade with the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition hopes that Republicans who say they'll vote for Trump despite his conviction will now support efforts to help other felons.
If people are saying that now, then we feel that they should have no excuse now as to whether or not people with felony convictions should at least be able to vote.
In Florida, felons are not allowed to run for public office until their civil rights are restored. But the U.S. Constitution overrides state law and allows Trump's name to appear on Florida's presidential ballot. Greg Allen, NPR News, Miami.
The Biden administration says it has lifted some restrictions on Ukraine's use of American weapons to defend itself from Russian attacks. Until now, the U.S. had demanded Ukraine only deploy American arms to liberate territory seized by Russia inside Ukraine. From Moscow, NPR's Charles Means has the latest on the policy shift.
Speaking at a meeting of NATO foreign ministers, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirmed the U.S. would now allow Kiev's use of American weapons to strike targets inside Russia to defend against attacks on the border city of Kharkiv. Blinken said the change in policy reflected a need to adapt and adjust to changing circumstances in Ukraine. In recent weeks, Russia has upped attacks on Kharkiv, often by launching missile strikes from just across the Russian side of the border. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov played down the U.S. policy shift, arguing Ukraine was already using American weapons to attack Russia and characterized it as more evidence of the U.S.'s direct involvement in the conflict. Charles Maines, NPR News, Moscow.
It's NPR.
This is KUOW News. I'm Paige Browning in Seattle. The Wing Luke Museum in Seattle says it's going to relaunch the Confronting Hate Together exhibit by the end of June. The museum leaders did not give word on when the full museum itself will reopen after more than 24 employees walked off the job last week protesting this exhibit. It focuses on how Jewish, Asian, and Black communities have banded together during times of hate. But people who walked off argued that the exhibit platforms Zionist ideology and tries to frame Palestinian liberation as anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. They are remaining off the job today. But the museum says it's going to relaunch the exhibit June 30th with additional context on how it came to be. Washington state's Democrats have repeatedly tried and failed to put abortion protections explicitly in the state constitution. But Jeannie Lindsay reports those protections might already exist.
Many Democrats in Olympia want abortion rights laid out in the state constitution. That would make it a lot harder for future policymakers to overturn state laws supporting abortion access. But part of Washington's constitution might actually include protections for abortion already.
There is, I think, a strong argument that under our right to privacy, under our state constitution, there already is that right.
That's State Attorney General Bob Ferguson, who's also running for governor. Courts across the country have ruled that privacy clauses in state constitutions include at least some protection for abortion, but it would take a court challenge to one of Washington's abortion laws before the state Supreme Court would weigh in here. I'm Jeannie Lindsay in Olympia.
We're watching to see if NASA will finally be able to launch 2 astronauts to the International Space Station on board Boeing's Starliner space capsule tomorrow morning. It's set to lift off from Cape Canaveral, Florida at 9:25 our time tomorrow. And if it does, it could set the stage for NASA to conduct future routine flights to the ISS. This is KUOW.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments. Fisher's dedicated team of specialists provide resources on investing, retirement income, estate planning, and more. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. Seattle's police chief is out. What does this PD police department need? What do we need from them? I'm going to ask you that, South Seattle Emerald reporter and writer Lauryn Bray, because you're on my panel today.
Hello.
Good to have you. I'm going to ask that of Seattle Times investigations editor. Welcome back, Jonathan Martin.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, and Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce president and CEO, Rachel Smith. I always want to know what you think, too.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Thanks for coming. You can watch this show. Listening to it, excellent. Watching it, could it be even better? You can watch and listen if you're on YouTube because we stream the show live. Just search KUOW Public Radio. Okay, before we talk police chief comings and goings, when Donald Trump was convicted yesterday on 34 felony counts, I wondered how our local Republicans would react. The state Republican Party chair called the charges dubious, prosecutors politically biased, judge lacks credibility. He did say it's very likely the conviction will be overturned on appeal. So I guess he thinks the court system is not totally rigged. The King County Republican chair was more supportive of the courts. Quote, as Republicans, we respect the rule of law and the legal process. Except then he says the real verdict will be known on Election Day in November. So is that respecting the legal process, saying that this is not a real verdict? I don't know. He could have said the Election Day will be a different kind of political verdict. But what'd you all think of the reaction in Washington State to guilty, guilty, guilty times 34?
I think it was interesting that they said that it was unlikely to be overturned on appeal. Because
he said the state Republican chair said very likely to be overturned.
Okay, I was about to say, because that's what I was thinking, that it was going to be likely to be overturned. So honestly, I just feel like it's a waste of people's time.
You think it's going to be overturned?
I most likely, and if not overturned, because I feel like the more interesting part of it would be if he is elected, is he going to pardon himself? Like if it's not?
And it's a state crime, so I don't think he can even do it.
I would say that the jaws of justice have finally gotten Donald Trump, and I think they also referred to it at one point as a circus, and I think there certainly has been a circus, but it was not the trial. I think it's been the behavior of this now convicted felon. I, too, take the rule of law seriously, take the criminal legal system seriously, take the presidency seriously. And I think, as I think about a circus from the Washington State GOP, that endorsement process that they went through, I think maybe even Dave Reichert called it a circus at the time. So
yeah, state party endorsed Semi Bird. Dave Reichert was in town, skipped the proceedings, etc.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Trump broke fundraising records today, so his folks are sticking with him. I just get worried about how there's a streak of conspiratorial nihilism in the Trump wing of the Republican Party. Like, if you think about Trump's attacks on county election officials, public health officials, now the judiciary, and last but not least, journalism. And I worry that we're just tearing down the pillars of civil society for that part of the Republican Party is tearing down the pillars of civil society so that their folks don't believe in anything except what Donald Trump says.
My understanding, by the way, is Trump can't even start the appeals process until after he's sentenced in July. He has an appeal coming to a appellate court in New York, and then if that fails, he can appeal again. But those courts, they don't have to hear that next appeal. So I don't know that we're going to get an appeals verdict of any kind before the election. We'll see. Okay, back to more local news of the week here on KUOW's Week in Review. Seattle's mayor demoted his police chief this week. Chief Adrian Diaz has been accused of gender and racial discrimination and sexual harassment. There have been unproven rumors that he hired a romantic partner. He denies all of this. Diaz will stay on at Seattle Police Department to work on some unspecified special assignments. KUOW's Soundside host Libby Dankman asked the mayor,
why is Adrian Diaz still employed by the city of Seattle?
Number one, I think he's earned it. 27-year career. I don't think that it is appropriate or fair just to discharge him. He has a lot of community support that he's earned. He still has a lot of talent. And so the question for me is, how can I use that talent to better protect people in the city? So we're not giving him anything. We're allowing him the opportunity to use his expertise to help us. And that's why. And he's not the chief, and so he's not in a position to, affect the investigations. And again, I'm not in the business of humiliating anybody. And again, he's a well-respected, nationally respected person. And again, I think he's earned it.
So Harold is adopting a wait-and-see attitude in a way, but he's not waiting for the investigation to finish before he brings in a new interim chief. He did praise Diaz's outstanding leadership. Quote, his integrity in my mind, this is the mayor talking, his integrity in my mind is beyond reproach. Is the mayor taking the right approach to all this?
Well, I think he's, for one thing, he has to think about protecting the department or the city from inevitable legal claims and the existing ones. There was just a parade of red flags from particularly the women in the department. And then there was a really damning report that was said the department is not going to be close to its goals of diversifying the force 30% of the force by 2030.
Being women by the year 2030.
By women. I got to imagine Bruce Harrell must have been tired of the drip, 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 drip of another lawsuit. And these lawsuits, by the way, are being filed by very credible, well-known, respected female cops. And so I know he's praising the Diaz publicly. He also demoted him. So the actions there tell me that the administration had had enough of it.
Yeah, I would say that, we need change in SPD, and changing the culture of a large organization is hard to do. I know. I worked in government for almost 15 years.
What did you do in government?
I most recently was the deputy county executive for King County Executive Dow Constantine. I worked at Sound Transit. I worked for Mayor Greg Nichols many mayors ago. So I've spent a lot of time in government. It's hard to do, and we've done it. I think SPD it's not performing as expected for our community right now. And it's okay to say that things are a little better. And that we still need to do better, and that there's a lot of work to do. And that work has to be to create the culture that we want and need for our community. The mayor's made his decision, which was to bring in an interim chief, one who is a real true regional leader, and who understands the lift of culture change, I would say. She gets it. She's got an unwavering commitment to doing the right thing. I think that's a very good thing. And Chief Diaz has done a lot for this community. Good and important work was done under his leadership. He formed a lot of really important community relationships. And I would say for that, we're appreciative.
Yeah, I want to speak to the point that the lawsuits are coming from credible people that have worked within SPD for years. It's not just alleging sexual harassment. It's also lawsuits alleging racial discrimination and creating this culture of segregation, as was alleged in one of the lawsuits.
From Eric Greening.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so there's argument from Diaz supporters that the racism being alleged in the lawsuits is not entirely his fault because it's existed within the department since before he was there, which might be true because to me it does speak to the criticism that the culture of policing as a whole needs to be completely changed. And where we are with that in the midst of this SPOG contract and the recruitment and retention plans that the mayor's office has been doing on behalf of SPD. And I can't say that fits well with all of that. But as to the four women who are suing Diaz, they're alleging predatory behavior and grooming, and they've allowed their attorney to speak on their behalf. The article published by KUOW said that Adrian Diaz would comment on Officer Valerie Carson's dresses and high heels, and he tried to create a situation where he would be alone with her on New Year's Eve in 2020. So
allegedly,
yeah, allegedly, right. So if all of that is true, that is behavior from a police chief that is absolutely unacceptable. And I do think that the move to bring in a female interim chief is strategic in the sense that they are trying to comply with the 30 by 30 initiative. And I'm sure that getting rid of Diaz and appointing the female chief will attract more women candidates. I also do want to make the point that they are already attracting more candidates following the finalization of the details with the SPOG contract. They have had a uptick in their applications. They're having an average of 15 point something applications a day now, which is a jump of, I think, about 6 since before the contract was finalized. So they've already been doing more to attract candidates to SPD. And I have no idea what the data is, if those percentage of people applying are women, if it is 30%. I don't know. But I'm sure that this move was strategic in the context of the retention and recruitment plans.
Well, let's talk about that interim chief. We're talking about an officer trainer, Sue Rahr, who was King County Sheriff and was known for culture change there. She said that, I remember that she said that sheriff's deputies are not warriors, they're guardians, and she repeated that a lot, it's a whole mindset shift, and she focused on conflict de-escalation. RAR is not waiting for the investigation to say that SPD is not a good enough workplace for women.
It's a natural thing that happens when you have a profession that is dominated by one gender for, half a century, 3/4 of a century, and making those transitions are really hard.
And she did not just blame a few bad apples. She said SPD has a culture problem.
We can keep playing whack-a-mole every time there's an allegation here or there, but until we change the system, we're not going to have meaningful change. And that was one of the things that really drew me to this opportunity, is to actually do something that's going to matter.
Although it must be hard to make lasting change when you've already said you don't want the job. You're just interim. So do you believe her? Sounds like I'm hearing you. You do. Do you think she can make any change? Does the symbolism matter when it's a temporary or a caretaker hire?
Yeah, I mean,
national searcher, that's important.
Yeah, I think that the voters and businesses and our community is pretty clear-eyed about what we need. We need enough cops to meet response times. We need alternatives to police, and we need serious reforms within the department. So I think she's going to focus on those things and work to get them done. And as you just said, and I said also, she does get it. I mean, she understands culture change. She understands the importance of it. And I think she is ready for that lift. And I think it's a good thing that she's not waiting, that she is saying this, on day one. And I'm really interested in what both she and Kathy O'Toole, who they're going to be bringing in as a consultant.
Former Seattle police chief.
Indeed. What they're going to have to say about the permanent, the search, which the mayor has already announced, and what they need in a permanent chief. And I think the fact that they're running now and they're going to be able to advise on the future, I support all that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Kathy O'Toole was the last outside police chief. They promoted from within.
By the way, y'all are more familiar with Kathy. I've never heard anyone call her Kathy, so I'll just call her Kathleen O'Toole. But we know, in other words, for someone who's new to Seattle, she's not, and we know her.
Okay. Yes. O'Toole was the last outside police chief. There's been tension about whether or not you should be continuing to promote from within. There had been a perception from that both Carmen Best, the previous police chief, and Adrian Diaz were too close with the union, with the rank and file. Need a little bit more arm's length distance as a manager. But going to the point about waiting, the SPD cannot wait. They still have a forward-way facing contract they need to negotiate. There is still the DOJ, the overhang of the DOJ settlement, and they're mostly out of that.
Just to fill people in, the Department of Justice has been sitting on the department trying to reform it, and Seattle PD is not all the way out of that guidance, that oversight.
For the last 12 years. Yeah. And then, they also, as Lauryn has covered well, the issues of hiring. It's a department that's got a lot to do and needs to do it now. So,
well, to speak to Bill's point that Sue is going to be interim. There's a lot of reasons why she might not want the job, right? To me, it creates this obvious question of what are the implications of having somebody come in and do all of this work about revamping the culture of women in SPD, and then saying, all right, I've done all this, and then now you come in and continue on what I've been doing. It, to me, speaks to the flaw in just having a different cycle of different people coming in and just trusting that the next person coming in is going to be as committed to police accountability and to solving some of these problems, which I have no idea of determining or knowing if that is going to be the case. But the idea that we have problems today and we have to act now is, I fear, going to create bigger problems down the line, because we can say, oh, we have this problem with accountability. Oh, we have this problem with sexual harassment and SPD being a boys' club. And we're still going to throw all this money at SPD because we have to solve these problems now, today.
You're talking about raising their salary?
Right, raising
officer
on the
salary?
retroactive pay and all of the details of the SPAG contract, as well as the recruitment and retention plans. And I want to bring this up, and I don't know if I'll be able to, so I'll just bring it up now. But a part of the recruitment plan is they're working on trying to find a way to factor affordable housing and housing development for officers that are coming into SPD, so that they're able to offer them something, right? And there's no final details with that from what I know now, but I did hear that being mentioned when they presented to the Public Safety Committee, and I'm talking about SPD's recruitment team. So it calls into question for me a lot of things about that particular issue. We have constituents who have been talking to city council about how they're not able to keep a roof over their head, but we're able to factor in these conversations about housing development for outside people of Seattle when we're not able to even pass bills on affordable housing development for our constituents today. So there's so many different things that are happening with SPD under the guise of we have all these problems today and we need to solve them today because we need to quicken our response times and we need more officers because public safety is such a huge problem. Whole time, a lot of the solutions that would solve the public safety problems are things like affordable housing. And we're only willing to do it for outside officers that are going to be candidates at SPD. Yeah.
Just to jump in on a couple of things here. I think also we do know that public safety is a top priority for the mayor. So in the spirit of not waiting, I think he is saying we will not wait, and he wants to move forward with that. And the recruitment and retention efforts also a priority for him. And I think, for the voters, we do the index, our public opinion research, and did that last in March. And 69% of voters said hiring more police officers should be an immediate priority for the city. So I do think that there's still work to do there for people to feel safe. I'll also just note that we asked a question. I trust the Seattle City Council to reform the police department without endangering public safety. And while that number is still high on the disagree, it is up 10 points on the agree. So 10 points higher of people saying they trust the city council to now reform the police department than they did last September.
Before we leave this topic, one more note about Seattle Police Department culture. I found that this was a good interview. KUOW Soundside host Libby Denkman talking to the mayor, and she asked about the statement that Seattle Police Department made after 4 female officers filed a $5 million sexism and harassment tort claim a month ago.
So the SPD statement reads, "The department does not litigate tort claims in the media. For that reason, quote, the department will not respond to the personal attacks rooted in rough estimations of hearsay, reflecting at their core individual perceptions of victimhood that are unsupported and in some instances belied by the comprehensive investigations that will no doubt ultimately become record." So in its statement, the department, in response to these 4 women who filed the tort claim, are labeling their claims perceptions of victimhood. Does that reflect the culture that you want to see, Mayor?
Absolutely not. That statement is not a reflection of our position in the mayor's office or our values, and we don't believe in victim shaming. We want people to be able to come forward with their experiences and give us the opportunity to get better. The statement that you read, I thought, number one, was very difficult to understand, a little wordy, but also it didn't reflect the spirit by which I like to see departments address these matters. So that statement, I think if they had the opportunity to say it better, I think they would have said it better. So I'm not going to shame them for their statement, but that doesn't reflect how we view these matters, and I'm sure they would restate that if given the opportunity.
I heard a rumor that the public affairs director was seen cleaning out his desk. You're nodding. I don't know if that's really, is that true that he's around?
I heard that too.
Yeah.
The perception was that the public affairs director, who was named in one of the lawsuits, wrote that statement. So like I said, Harold's got to had to been sick of this Like, he doesn't want to have to go on KOW and talk about, how, that victim shaming, and that's he's got other stuff he would be talking about. So,
yeah.
By the way, I'd say too, none of this was a surprise. A couple weeks ago, most of the newsrooms in Seattle were camped out at City Hall because there was rumors that there was City Hall and SPD folks were going back and forth all day. So I think the perception was this was, at least for the last couple of weeks, this has been in the works.
Yeah. Okay, so the search for a permanent, what's the word? It's not, nothing's permanent. An official, a non-interim police chief goes on. The mayor said he would consider internal candidates, but as you said, he seemed to be looking to hire somebody outside. We'll see. The search could take, according to the mayor, anywhere from 4 to 6 months. Let's take a little break here on KUOW's Week in Review. We're talking to the Seattle Times' Jonathan Martin there, and South Seattle Emerald's Lauryn Bray, and the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce's CEO, Rachel Smith. I'm Bill Radke. We're streaming the show on YouTube. Search KUOW Public Radio. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Chris Morgan, host of The Wild, a KUOW podcast about the wonders and resilience of nature and the people working to protect it. Through expert conversations and up-close encounters, we'll take you on a journey across the Pacific Northwest and around the world to explore some of our planet's most wild places, how they work, why they're so important, and what we can all do to preserve them. Listen to The Wild, available on your favorite podcast app.
And beginning next Friday, June 7th, KUOW's The Wild with Chris Morgan will air Friday evenings at 8 and Saturday afternoons at 2. You can find more information at KUOW.org/schedule.
It may be hard to find a clock radio these days, but if you've got a smart speaker, you can set up a morning routine to wake up with KUOW and NPR. Set your morning alarm and then start the day with a weather report, and then you'll go straight into Morning Edition.
What a great way to wake up.
Learn how to set up a morning routine at KUOW.org/smart speaker.
It's KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. We never stop chit-chatting. We're working stuff out here on when the microphones are off. So we were just talking about Seattle's looking for a new police chief. And then in the break, we were talking about Seattle looking for a new King County Regional Housing Administrator, if that agency's even going to last. What's going on with that? Who would want that job? Tell me what you think about this vacancy.
Well, I'll say a couple of things. One, I think it's important to remember that before KCRHA, the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, was created.
Homelessness Authority.
Yeah,
yes.
there was decades of fragmentation in the homeless response system. Every consultant that government hired, from Barb Poppy to McKenzie, we all remember those names, said the same thing: the status quo is not working. And the purpose of the new entity, when it was being created, if you sort of boil it all down, was to take a regional approach to have shared metrics of success and be able to deliver results from the contracts that the providers have, to reduce some of the politics in the conversation, and to be a real public-private partnership. And I still think all of that is true. But we also have to be honest that success isn't moving at the speed or at the scale that we need. The next CEO is going to need, I believe, a new functioning governance structure that won't hinder the funding and the operations and the coordination that the agency was meant to foster. And we at the Seattle Metro Chamber support making those kinds of changes to the governance and to the organization, its role, its scope, et cetera. The CEO search process has been underway and is likely to conclude next week. So there should be...
they advanced a candidate last week, didn't they?
Indeed, they did. I've been on that search committee as well.
Out of D.C., out of HUD or Health and Human Services?
Yes, that is correct. And... So I don't want to presuppose the final outcome of that. Okay. It's been a confidential process-ish. All
right. What do you want to say, Seattle Times?
Well, there was apparently a leak out of that interview process, which I think for the folks following it in the news media saw that as an indication that there is if you're being sabotaged in the middle of the interview process, it's not a good way of coming in the door.
And for those listeners who don't follow this closely, is it fair to say the biggest issue is that Seattle wanted a county-wide approach to homelessness, although Seattle's paying most of the money, but the rest of the county isn't necessarily on board? And there's a whole lot of cooks in the kitchen?
I don't know, maybe friendly amendment to that. I do think that there is an interest in a regional approach from everyone in the region. And I think that a lot of regional partners are doing things in their community and are committed. There's a regional framework developed. So I think that there is...
there's a framework.
Yes. I think there is buy-in that we do need a regional approach. Obviously, it's been a bumpy start. Nobody would suggest otherwise. And I do think there are too many cooks in the kitchen.
Okay.
And so that's that governance structure change.
There
that
may be
people are
buy-in,
talking
but there's
about.
not a lot of dollars from not many of the regional cities fund KCRHA.
I think it's how you look at investment, though. So there's dollars is one kind of investment. Also, I think about the mayor of Redmond, for example, who has cited 2 permanent supportive housing facilities in her city and taken some slings and arrows for that. And I think it's wonderful that she's done that. And so she's spending a lot of political capital to get that done.
Yeah.
Sure.
And King County Dow Constantine can't just say, hey, Mercer Island, do it.
I was a little bit surprised in this process too. Feels like there's some turbulence from City of Seattle too. Seattle has been the largest funder, in on the ground floor, and I think that the previous council may have been more interested in the current one about distancing even further from KCRHA. That's the perception. Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it feels like there's an issue of control for city council members putting money in and allocating the money and then just offloading it to this other entity, which has had governance. You had administration problems, not cutting contracts, and not finishing contracts, not getting dollars out the door, and their biggest single effort to end to address homelessness downtown also kind of blew up. So I'm not quite sure what the relationship with the city of Seattle and KCRHA going forward, but it feels like that's going to be something that the next CEO is also going to have to address.
Okay, I got to be the bad guy because we got to move on. We got other things to talk about as well. Seattle Public Schools community meetings on these proposed elementary school closures, like a quarter of the elementary schools, possibly. We'll see. That got off to a bumpy start this week with hundreds of parents in the Roosevelt High School auditorium trying to get answers on Tuesday. And KUOW's education reporter Sammy West said it was tense.
Even before the meeting started, dozens of parents rallied outside fighting for their schools.
Keep schools open! Show your work!
And the night ended with frustrated parents booing and shouting at Superintendent Brent Jones and other district leaders.
No. Feel free to come out here. But show your work. This isn't a conducive environment to have a back and forth like that. So come on out and we'll have a conversation out there.
In a brief presentation, district officials reiterated their belief that closing up to 20 elementary schools is essential to address the district's financial crisis. And they acknowledged staff cuts will also be necessary. After the meeting, many parents said they were disappointed it wasn't more of a conversation. Megan Campbell is the mom of a first grader at Laurelhurst Elementary.
I think people feel a little cheated coming here, but it's also just very apparent that they've already made their decision. Without saying this is going to happen, it's going to happen.
So I rarely hear someone who hates the outcome, but is thrilled with the process. But what's your reaction to this?
Well, I just want to say that this is a regressive tax state. It's a haven for the rich, and it's never adequately funded education. SPS is underfunded at the state level and the district level. And there was actually a lawsuit, McCleary versus Washington, in which the King County Superior Court ruled that the state was not fulfilling its obligation to fully fund education in the state. So I just want to make it clear that all of this is happening under the umbrella of all of that, right? So it's created this like crabs in a bucket situation where people are essentially having to advocate for the elementary school that their kid goes to. And so white parents are typically getting what they want out of that advocacy. And there's like a history of that happening where white parents in historically districts that have not been redlined, and the city is mostly divided by redlining. So there's a lot of there's some people of color within those groups whose voices are getting tokenized as well. So there's kind of this co-opting of narratives that the poor Black kids are losing out. And you heard this a lot in COVID, during COVID, where there was a push to get kids back into school because the poor Black kids were losing out on remote learning. And today, some of those parents are still arguing that instead of closing the schools, they need to bring kids back from homeschool, because there was this push from remote learning to homeschool, kind of like this I guess, trend that happened there, where after COVID, some kids never came back to school. And that is also what has contributed to the low enrollment numbers. I will also say, like, just from like a child development perspective, there was a lot of like families that realized that like remote learning and alternative learning modules were just better for their kids, and that they were not getting, their kids were not getting what they were supposed to get out of public school education. Yeah. And they found that, homeschool, remote learning, other modules like that were just better for their kids.
You're talking about an enrollment drop that is one of the big factors in Seattle possibly closing schools.
Right. As well as the budget deficit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the budget deficit was foreseeable. When they signed a labor contract a couple of years ago, they said at the time we're not going to be able to afford this. I think there was an expectation the legislature was going to come in and bail out Seattle schools, and as well as other districts are also in the red. This is not just a Seattle schools issue. Certainly the issues that Lauryn then raised about the enrollment drops and how the pandemic completely upended our relationship with public schools. And again, this is not just an SPS issue. This is a nationwide problem. There's kids that just didn't come back for various reasons. I do also think that Seattle schools does have transparency problems. Their communication problems with their parents, including myself. I'm happily sent 2 kids through the Seattle schools, but they made some decisions, including, I think we've talked about in the show, the highly capable program shutting down, which angered or frustrated a group of parents that are highly mobile, that might have more means to send their kids elsewhere. I continually battle this Seattle schools. Their public records policies are terrible. They just don't respond to public records in a way that is timely or I think is legal. So the frustration, I think you heard at that meeting, is a culmination of a lot of things that, and certainly the closure of neighborhood elementary schools especially, they're so critical. The relationship to a neighborhood and their school is just a core part of a healthy neighborhood. Particularly the schools are good. So a lot of this is, and from my view, a lot of this is the Seattle School District has imposed upon itself, as well as some larger factors.
Yeah, I'll just build on that a tiny bit to just say, again, as somebody who's worked in government, and making difficult budget decisions is really hard. And I do think that it is really important to be transparent and compassionate and empathetic in decision making, to really expect the tough questions and that kind of feedback, and to be ready to work through emotions running really high. I mean, it's all just very real for people, to your point, Jonathan. And I'm not saying they didn't do that, but I'm just saying it comes with the territory. Sure. And I know Dr. Jones, and I know he and his team are going to try to solve these problems and do the right thing. And while the engagement process, I think, seems like it's been off to a little bit of a difficult start, I think they'll navigate it. And I understand there was like a meeting last night. I think it went better. Yeah. And so I'm encouraged by that. I'll also just say that I'm encouraged by the fact that we have 2 new school board members, one of whom is the fantastic Sarah Clark, who is the Chamber's policy director. So,
Okay, you're listening there to the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce President Rachel Smith. We've got the Seattle Times' Jonathan Martin here, South Seattle Emerald reporter Lauryn Bray on KUOW's Week in Review. And our next topic: if money is tight for you right now and somebody gave you $500 a month, no strings attached, what would you do with it? Well, this week, KUOW's economy podcast, Booming, told us about local pilot programs to give low-income people $500 a month for about a year. One big concern about these kind of cash payments is, well, won't the recipients just stop working? Results from a King County program showed the number of people working almost doubled. A designer of Tacoma's program, Natalie Foster, gave us an example of a guaranteed income helping someone work. And I am going to see if I can find it. Okay. Here is, she's talking about a recipient who wanted to be you'll hear what her career goal is.
I can't spell it, but I can define it. It's drawing blood. And she...
Phlebotomist, by the way, is the word. The word was phlebotomist.
She had been going to the community college to get her phlebotomy certificate and had fallen behind on tuition by $300 because of a car emergency that she'd had. So she'd put that dream on hold because she didn't have $300 to go in and pay for that tuition. And she got the first check. She walked down to the community college. She paid the $300. She re-enrolled in her phlebotomy classes, and she is now a phlebotomist. Like, that is an example of what it means to be able to invest in yourself and pursue a dream and find meaningful work when you have just a little bit more breathing room.
Anybody think guaranteed income is a coming trend?
I hope so. I really hope so. I think that it is a great idea, and there's data that shows that it is effective. Data shows that when you give people money, they want to work more and not less. And traditionally, the argument against guaranteed income was that people would not work if they had a steady check coming in. We have data that shows that that's not true. And there's also data that shows that the mental health impact is great as well. When people are not impacted by their finances, their mental health improves. And yeah, I'm all for it.
I'm glad you brought that up because this isn't, that's a big concern. That's some people's stopping point, they say, is that people are going to misspend this money, that they're not going to work. But just, stability and predictability is just so huge. It's a financial, but it's also, as you said, a mental health issue, the ability to take your kid. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, most people can't afford a $400 emergency. I forget what study that was. I had linked it in one of the articles that I wrote for the Emerald. So if you really follow me, you find it. But there's data that shows that most people cannot afford a $400 emergency. And the pilot program that was done was, I think, $500 a month.
Yeah.
So if you have an emergency every single month, that is only going to cover that. Like, people are not able to pay all of their rent with this, or,
Right.
it'll buy groceries twice a month. It's not this big sum of money.
Right.
I actually wrote a story about UBI, Universal Basic Income, back in my late 90s when I was covering welfare reform. If you remember that, the Clinton era changes in welfare policy, which really tied income from the government, anti-poverty income, to work. And I wrote about this because the UBI is the opposite philosophy of that. It's been around for almost 100 years. It certainly got more kind of popularized with Andrew Yang. He ran for president in 2016, and then for New York mayor. The relationship between work, the expectation of work requirements or engagement with the labor market when you're getting public money is something that there's a lot of research on both sides to support whichever position you want to take.
You
can find a study that says, work requirements lead people to engage in the labor market. You could find research studies that say UBI, Universal Basic Income, that is given without these strings attached, can lead people to work. I know from covering social services and poverty for a lot of years, the ability to adapt to crises when you're operating on a shoestring is extraordinarily tough and causes people to make decisions that cost them more money.
Right.
I think about like banking, where if you're not able to have predictable income and not able to engage with a bank, you buy banking services that are 10 times more expensive than if you had predictability in your income. I think that there's potential for this to be a real genuine debate at the federal level, because there is support across the aisle for this. I know folks in the Washington State Legislature, Republicans in the Washington State Legislature, like this idea of.
That's interesting, because I've heard of Republicans mostly, but opposing.
Yeah, I mean,
Guaranteed.
Mitt Romney has had a kind of the Mitt Romney world, that type of politician has had a reasonably warm relationship to this.
Okay.
So it's there is a possibility of this being a kind of a more centrist anti-poverty program.
And I would just add, there's the stuff happening in our own backyard here, but also we just took a chamber trip to South Korea, and we were briefed on a number of their they call them their welfare programs. It's different than us, obviously, but they had something that was called the Seoul Safety Pilot Program, which provides financial support to households trailing behind the minimum income standard by supplementing a certain percentage. They also have the Seoul Emergency Welfare Support Program, which provides financial assistance to low-income households in crisis due to sudden events. Obviously, Seoul and Korea is very different. It's apples to oranges, but I think there's interesting models that are being experimented with around the globe. So I think we can look at some of the stuff that's happening in our backyard, but also look more globally at some of these other experiments that are happening.
We asked some KUOW listeners, what would you do with $500 a month? And Heather said, I'd invest in my health, put it towards a better, more comprehensive health insurance plan. I can only afford the most basic care coverage right now. Jan said, toward purchasing and paying for a hybrid EV for me and one for my college-age daughter, 2 more fossil fuel hog cars off our roads. Shelley says an extra $500 a month would let me see a dentist for the first time in 14 years, get new glasses for the first time in 10 years, get a used couch instead of sitting on crates, be able to afford healthy food and take better care of myself. And Marion says I would use it toward transportation to job interviews, pay a babysitter, and buy a cup of coffee. So and by the way, you can join our community feedback club. We sometimes ask you about your thoughts on the week's news. You just text the word club to the number 206-926-9955. 206-926-9955. One more topic, since we just talked about, affordability. What could you do? How much do you need? $500 a month. I want to bounce something off you before we take our break. This is a voicemail from a listener who called us. We were talking about Seattle growing and densifying, and this listener was asking, do we really need to grow?
Hello, Bill. Paul, lifetime Seattle resident. Yes. So the premise that we need more housing is built on the idea that we ad nauseum need to add more people to the population base, ad nauseum add more big corporate businesses that need a big population base. If affordable housing and housing indeed is in short supply, at least enter into the equation the idea that maybe we don't need more population. We don't need more big anchors coming to Seattle. Thank you. Bye.
So this is a sentiment I hear regularly, and since we have the head of the Seattle Chamber of Commerce with us, I want to get all your, sort of quick takes on the idea of, is being a boomtown, all things told, pros, cons, has it been worth it? Is it going to stay worth it?
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate Paul's perspective and love that he's a longtime listener and lifetime resident. But he might not be shocked to hear that the head of the chamber does not share that opinion exactly. I am, I'm pro people. I think it brings diversity. I'm pro business. That brings prosperity. And I'm pro housing for more people in more places at more income levels. We live in a country that allows for the freedom of people to move and live where they want to live. And we happen to live in a place where a whole bunch of other people want to live, a place where our innovative and creative spirit has spawned companies like Nordstrom, Amazon, Microsoft, Starbucks, and companies like Tutabella and Marination and Retail Lockbox. I mean, it's an incredible place to start and grow a business. And I think we need to continue to invest in our homegrown. We need to invest in our own from a workforce development perspective, as at the same time that we welcome others. I think that prosperity is a good thing. We just need to increase access to it. And I think good jobs are a good thing. We just need to increase access to them.
Yeah, I would say that I definitely agree with the commenter in the sense that we don't need more companies coming to develop in Seattle. And the reason why I would say I agree, and not with the first point also, because I do disagree that the affordable housing argument comes from that idea. I think that the affordable housing argument stands on its own because affordable housing is its own separate crisis. But the idea that we don't need outside developers coming in, I would say that my perspective on it is a little bit different because I think about it in the context of something like a nationwide search where there are certain companies that will look for the best candidate that they can find outside of the state and then pay that person hundreds of $1,000s for a salary, right? Rather than looking at the internal people that live in the state that could potentially fit those qualifications and what the implications of that are. Also, we were talking on the break earlier about like a company like Amazon that creates a lot of jobs for people that live within the region. And I would say that that would be, you know, a good solution if these companies were coming in and creating jobs that actually paid people a decent wage. Then, you know, we probably might not have a lot of criticism.
Well, Amazon has a lot of pretty high earners.
Yeah. And I would say that Amazon in that aspect is probably a really good company because they also do invest in the professional development of the people that already work within them. Like they have a bunch of programs that like people that work, for example, if you work on like if you're just fulfilling stuff for packages that to go out, if you wanted to then take a class to do coding, they would support you with that. So Amazon is a unique company in that way. But I would say that if you have companies that are coming out that are not paying people decent wages and people are showing up to city council meetings talking about how they aren't being paid decent wages, how do we level that? Is there some sort of way that we can say, hey, if you come to Seattle, you have to pay people a decent wage? Is there something that we can do to kind of allow people to, I guess, take advantage of the jobs that would be coming? People don't want to work jobs that aren't going to pay them a decent wage. And people always talk about how people don't want to work. I think that's the issue. If you're not getting paid right, you don't want to work.
I appreciate Rachel's point about basically the growth coming from within, from the homegrown companies. You know, I spent my daughter just graduated from a university in St. Louis, and seeing what some of those Midwest cities, I lived around Detroit for a while too, seeing what cities look like when they don't grow is rough. They have a whole different set of challenges than Seattle's had with essentially what my colleague Danny Westney calls the prosperity bomb, the wealth bomb that came with the huge growth, the run up, the correlation between the rise in unsheltered homelessness and Amazon beginning to hire 50,000 people in the South Lake Union neighborhood. It's a correlation causation issue, but there is definitely consequences of the wealth bomb going off here and the inability for a lot of my colleagues who are great journalists at Seattle Times that can't afford to buy a house. The consequences of the wealth have changed this area. On the other hand, I lived here in the 90s, and I remember the sort of the nostalgia for lesser Seattle always strikes me as a little bit funny because there's very serious problems in a pre-Amazon Seattle as well. So
what problem are you thinking of?
Well, violent crime was really awful. I think the city was probably more racially divided. I think that there was a kind of malaise that was over the city as well.
People talk about, it was easier to drive around then. True, if you drove a car, but if you didn't, there really wasn't any light rail, or there was no other way to get around, right? So.
Hey, we got to take a short break because we're going to come back and fulfill my promise of giving people something to smile about at the end of the show. Quick break. We'll be right back.
Support for KUOW comes from Archbright, offering HR consulting to organizations on an ongoing or project basis, providing short-term help or long-term assistance as needed. Details at archbright.com.
Unlock the power of public radio as a branding tool by becoming a business sponsor. Not only will this raise awareness for your business or organization, but you'll also champion KUOW and NPR's mission to create and serve a more informed public. Learn more at kuow.org/business.
We're just about to wrap up a KUOW's Week in Review with anything that made us smile this week that you want to pass on.
Sure, I'll start. I had the opportunity to hear U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy speak on a panel about social connection as an antidote to the loneliness epidemic. Mm-hmm. And you might be like, why does that make you happy? Because it was talking about using food and music and film and sports and art as a way to make social connections. And he is an absolutely delightful person. He's brilliant. He's charming. He's thoughtful. He's kind. He's like one of those people that I think I feel healthier and better when he's around. And then we got to go to a Mariners game and they won. So go Mets.
Yeah, there's connection at a game too.
I told my one of my younger colleagues that I was going to a concert last night. She said, "Oh, let me guess, it's a dad band." And I was like, oh, Pearl Jam qualified as a dad band. It kind of hurts. But it was a fantastic show. It's I talk about another homegrown icon. Yeah, that was a fantastic experience, and anybody who hasn't seen a show at Climate Pledge really should. It's an incredible place to see a show.
Yeah, Lauryn, anything smile worthy?
Honestly, it's been a little hopeless for me, but increased support. Talking about what's going on in Palestine with the attack on Gaza, more celebrities, more people with big platforms and voice in the community and in the world are talking about it. Ariana Grande posted a link for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. Very, very, very tardy in my opinion, but it did garner a lot of funding for the organization. So I'm glad people are using their voice more.
Yeah, speaking of funding, it occurred to me that if Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos broke off only $1 billion each, they could run that year-long basic income, guaranteed income program for 333 million people. So, yeah, there's that. It's a week in review on KUOW. I want to thank my panel, Lauryn Bray, reporter and writer at South Seattle Emerald, Seattle Times investigations editor Jonathan Martin, and Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, the president, the CEO, Rachel Smith. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Good to be with you this week. Thank you to producer Kevin Kniestedt, Kathy Faulkner running the board, and more support from Hans Twite as well. I'm Bill Radke. We'll be back next week.